Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys my end of November wrap up. So I'm going to be talking about the books that I read from about the 16th of November to the 30th. If you want to hear my thoughts about the books that I read in the first half of the month, definitely go check out my November mid-month wrap up. So let's just get into it. I have quite a few books to talk about today, but most of the books that I read during these last couple of weeks I gave either a 4 or 5 star rating. So I'm just going to talk about the couple of books that I didn't really enjoy, and the first one I'm going to talk about is Nice Try, Jane Sinner. This is a book that I read for the weekend contemporary-a-thon. I was going to do a reading vlog for that contemporary-a-thon, but things just didn't work out. I was also kind of sick during that weekend and I didn't want to subject you guys to me being sick on camera. I expected to really enjoy this book and I ended up DNFing it at page 157, which is, I don't know, maybe like the 40-ish% mark, 30-40%. And I'm actually really sad about that, but I'm gonna get into the reasons why in a minute. But basically, this is about this girl named Jane who ends up dropping out of high school and goes to this community college and sees this advertisement for a reality show that this guy Alex is making, and so Jane decides to apply to be on the reality show and she gets in. And so that's really what this whole book is about. So my main gripe with this novel is that it is told in like a journal / diary format the entire time. So each chapter is just an entry of her diary for every day. And I have a big issue with books that are told in that format because usually it's a lot of telling and not showing, and that is just so not interesting and kind of boring most of the time. And being that this whole book revolves around a reality show, I expected it to be really amusing with lots of like stupid drama, you know, typical reality show stuff. But in reality, all of the characters were very one-dimensional, and whatever drama there was not entertaining in the least, and the challenges were stupid because basically this whole reality show was a competition to see who would be the last one standing. So they had all these challenges that they had to do each week to stay in the game. So yeah, all the challenges in the living situation, it was just all so mundane, and I was very disappointed by that, to be honest. And while Jane is a fairly interesting character, there were just so many things that bogged down the story for me that I was just struggling through it. And so I just decided to DNF it, and I really don't have any interest in picking it up in the future. I've heard some people rave and rave about this book though, so maybe if this plot interests you, I would suggest maybe taking it out of your library or something like that, but I will definitely be unhauling this because I just did not like it. The next book I want to discuss is Never Have I Ever with a Duke. This is by Darcy Burke. This is an arc that I got off of NetGalley, and I'm just so happy that I'm finally getting to my NetGalley arcs again. So this is a historical romance. I've actually never read anything by this author, but after reading this book, I definitely want to check out more of her books, and I'm just really excited to see more and more of her books getting put on NetGalley because I will definitely request more of them. So this is about Graham and Arabella, and essentially they are both in financial peril for very different reasons, and basically they decide to help each other get through their financial struggles, and along the way they fall in love, and I really enjoyed this. I'm giving this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed reading about Graham and Arabella's developing relationship, and I thought that all the side characters added a lot to the story, so I'm very excited to see that this is book 1 in a series of like companion novels, and I saw that the second and next installment in the series is about a character that I really enjoyed in this first installment. Also, this is the perfect length for a historical romance. I think I read this in just about a day, and yeah, it was also really well paced, so there's really nothing bad I can say about it. Next, I want to discuss To Be Honest by Maggie Ann Martin. I actually talked about this book quite a bit in a video that I recently put out, which is Underrated Books That I Love, where I just talked about books that I found on Goodreads that I really enjoy, but very few people have read read and rated on Goodreads. And so this was one of those books, and I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars as well. This is about this girl named Savannah, and she is plus size, and she has this mom who was also plus size, but she went on this crazy weight loss show, think something along the lines of The Biggest Loser, and she came back from that experience kind of crazy, and she ends up trying to push her views about weight loss onto Savannah. And so Savannah's just kind of dealing with a lot with her family in general, and she meets this guy named George, and they have the most adorable romance. I enjoyed it so much. I loved the representation in this, being that the main character is plus sized. And my favorite line from the book is, "Newsflash, fat isn't a bad word." I love the monologue that she has like towards the middle end of the book, where she basically explains to her mom that she loves her body the way it is and she doesn't want to be pushed to hate herself, basically. And I really loved that whole scene. I thought it was just so well done. I wish more people would read this. If you're looking for books with good plus size representation, definitely check out this book. The next book I want to discuss is a book that I actually also mentioned in that underrated books video, and that is Definitions of Indefinable Things. This is by Whitney Taylor. This was also a book that only had like 1,000 ratings on Goodreads, and I definitely think that more people should read this because the depression representation in this was just so well done. I've never read a book quite like this. So this is about this girl named Reggie and this guy named Snake, although Snake is not his real name, that's his nickname, which is kind of ridiculous, but I'll let it pass. And they meet basically when they're both at CVS picking up their prescriptions for antidepressants. And the story goes on from there. This romance is definitely very angsty, so if you're into that, you will love this book. There's also quite a bit of drama throughout with Snake's ex-girlfriend and stuff like that. But there's also a good amount of humor to kind of balance that out, although I will say the humor is more like dark humor. So I definitely think this is the kind of book that I would recommend to someone who is looking for a YA contemporary romance that is just kind of different and off the beaten path and just has more depth to it than the lighter and fluffier contemporaries do. This book is also paced really well. I had no problem reading it in a day, even though this book is well over 300 pages. And yeah, I mean, this book gave me a lot of feels because I have gone through depression myself, so I definitely related to these characters quite a bit. And yeah, this is definitely a book that I would recommend if you're looking for really good mental health rep as well. The next book I want to discuss is Her Naughty Holiday by Tiffany Reese. This is book 2 in the Men at Work companion romance series. I've talked about these books quite a bit. This is also a book that I talked about in my underrated books video because I think only like 900 people have rated this on Goodreads. I love these books because they're just short, smutty romances that are actually really well written. Tiffany Reese is one of my favorite romance authors. I actually found the audiobook for this on Hoopla and on Scribd, I think, so if you want to go that route, it's easily available for sure. This is about this girl named Clover and this guy named Eric, and Eric is basically a single dad, and Clover is getting ready to host Thanksgiving at her house, and her family is very overbearing and pretty negative towards her in general, and so she decides to kind of go into like this fake dating situation with Eric so that her family will get off her back basically, but then they end up actually falling in love. This was so cute and fun and well-paced. I highly recommend this series in general if you're looking for holiday romances because especially Thanksgiving, I feel like there's not a lot of Thanksgiving romances out there, so I would definitely recommend this one in particular. Also, I did end up giving this one 4 stars as well. And actually, speaking of Tiffany Reese, I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about the other book of hers that I read this month, and that is The Angel. And so this is book 2 in her original Sinners series. I don't know why, but this series is kind of hard to explain plot-wise. So we follow Nora Sutherland, who is a very famous erotica author, and then her boyfriend slash partner, who is named Surin, who is actually a priest. So this is definitely like a taboo, darker romance series. And it's also interesting because I don't know if I would strictly call this an erotica series because yes, there are sex scenes, but like the plot is also more important than the sex scenes. Usually in erotica, the plot is definitely at the background, definitely not important, but in these books, the plots and the characters are very important. So I don't really know how I would categorize this series, but this is a series essentially all about BDSM, but in this instance, it's done right. Tiffany Reese does a really good job of really explaining what BDSM is and putting a really big importance on consent. I think that's one of the kind of misconceptions that people seem to have about BDSM, is that it's non-consensual, and that is definitely not the case. And I think a main reason why so many people have these misconceptions about BDSM is because of the 50 Shades of Grey series. That was a series that became so popular years ago, and from what I understand, it definitely paints BDSM in a pretty negative light. To be fair, I have not read the books myself, but I've heard that they are really terrible, so I don't plan to. But from what I understand, Anastasia doesn't enjoy the BDSM, so it's not really consensual, and that is a big problem. But in this series, however, Tiffany Reese does just a wonderful job of fully explaining to the reader what BDSM is and how important consent is. And this installment in particular is about how Surin, who, like I said, is a priest, he is up to be promoted to a bishop, I think, and he definitely doesn't want to be promoted because that would take him further away from Nora. And then there's this reporter named Suzanne who gets this anonymous fax that basically says that there is something fishy going on with Surin, and so she's investigating him. So basically Surin sends Nora away for the summer so that she won't be caught in the crosshairs of this investigation. And so Nora ends up spending most of the novel with the secondary characters of Michael and Griffin, who end up falling in love with each other later on in the novel. I'm sorry that I can't explain this book and this series very well. I don't know what it is. I don't know. There's just a lot going on with the series, but I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. I gave the first book, which is called The Siren, 4 stars, and I read that back in May. So I was very much looking forward to jumping back into the series. You know, while reading this series, and this installment in particular did make me uncomfortable at some points, and I'll list those content warnings in a second. However, I do think that Tiffany Reese wrote these books that way for a reason, and I think you are kind of supposed to feel uncomfortable at some points. I just love how morally ambiguous all of the characters are, and I truly enjoyed every POV. And I think also that Reese does a phenomenal job intertwining all of these POVs and these narratives to build up some suspense as well. And I just love that this story did focus a lot more on Michael than the first installment, because I really loved his character, and his relationship with Griffin was just everything that I didn't know that I needed. So to get to content warnings, because there are quite a few for this book. First things first, if you are not someone that can stomach reading about BDSM, definitely avoid this series. Also in this installment, there's a scene in the very beginning that does involve blood play, which I didn't even know was like a thing. So I guess I was definitely getting educated while reading this book. And there's also a scene where rape and incest are talked about, but obviously they are not discussed in a positive way. That's basically referring to Surin's past. Yeah, all of that to say, if you are looking for a series that actually gets BDSM right and is actually really educational and just really well done, I can't recommend these books enough. Okay, and I have one more book that I gave 4.5 stars, and then I'm going to get to my 5-star reads of the month. So the last 4.5 book that I have is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. I was really looking forward to starting this series this month, and I definitely really enjoyed this book, but I do also have a few minor gripes with it as well. So this is a utopian slash dystopian science fiction series about society in the distant future. And basically at this point they have found a way to get rid of diseases and get rid of any way for you to actually die. And so basically to curb the population, they have what are called scythes. And scythes are basically the people in the society that have the power to glean people, which essentially means to kill or murder them. So this story centers on Citra and Rowan, and they become apprentices for a scythe, and the plot goes on from there. So for one thing, I really loved the world building and how gradually Neal Shusterman kind of built this world for us. And I thought that the political aspects of this were really cool as well, because basically in the society, everybody is governed by this AI called the Thunderhead, but the Scythedom is self-governed. So the Thunderhead has no say in anything that goes on in the Scythedom. And so basically there's just a lot of political things happening within the Scythedom because they are humans governing themselves. So in that aspect of the book, it is very realistic because the political situation we have going on, at least in this first installment, is just very realistic and kind of reminds me a lot of our current political climate in this country. I was fully planning on giving this book 5 stars when I was reading like the whole first half. I just loved it so much. But for me personally, the last like 20 to 25% really flagged a lot for me personally, like pacing wise. So I did find it to be a little bit of a struggle to get through the last part of the book. And also, while I was shook by most of the plot twists that were going on in this book, there were some that I thought were more predictable and just not as great in my opinion. Also, a lot of people seem to be annoyed by the romance that occurs between Citra and Rowan, but to me, I don't know, it didn't come off as insta-love to me, and it also didn't take the spotlight from the story, so I can't be mad at it. Like, yes, it's not the best romance I've ever read, but it's also not a romance that I hate. But yeah, overall, this is just a really phenomenal start to this series, and I loved how Neal Shusterman really made me think about morality and mortality a lot throughout this book. I was definitely feeling a lot of feels. I also want to bring up a content warning though. Obviously this book is all about gleaning people, which is killing people, but there are some instances throughout this book where there are these characters that do mass gleanings. So basically they show up to office buildings or public places and glean everyone that they can find. And so that made me very uncomfortable to read about and almost like sick to my stomach, because with all the mass shootings that we have going on in our country right now, it's too real, honestly. So I would be aware of that before going into this book, because if you are someone that could be triggered by that kind of subject matter, I would personally avoid this book, because there are quite a few mass gleanings that happen throughout and it's just a lot. So now on to my 3 5-star reads for the month. The first one is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling. If you guys are interested, I've been doing a reading vlog series basically documenting my experience rereading these books for the very first time. So definitely go check out that playlist on my channel if you're interested. But yeah, I couldn't give this less than 5 stars. There were quite a few things that I completely forgot about this installment in particular. And yeah, what can I say? It's Harry Potter. I cannot wait to read Order of the Phoenix this coming month, because I pretty much remember nothing about that installment except Professor Umbridge. And the next 5-star read that I want to talk about is Layer of Dreams by Libba Bray. This is book 2 in the Diviner series. And this book is quite a bit different from the first installment, and actually reading some reviews on Goodreads, I've realized that a lot of people actually like this installment a lot less than the Diviners, and I can understand why, because there's definitely a lot less action in this book, and this installment definitely focuses more on just laying really good groundwork for the future 2 books in the series. So I can understand why some people would give this a lower rating than the first installment, but for me personally, I still really enjoyed it and I could not give it less than 5 stars. The characters are definitely my favorite aspect of these books for sure, and I loved the new characters that were introduced. I just thought that they added a lot to the story. I also thought that the sleeping sickness plotline was very interesting, although it wasn't nearly as scary in my opinion as the plot in the first book. I still thought it was interesting, and I liked how it worked in conjunction with the main plot line of the overall series. I mean, once again, Libba Bray just does a phenomenal job making this 1920s setting just so refreshing and oddly modern. And I also loved how she incorporated actual events in history into this story, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act. That becomes much more prominent in this book than the first one. There's also eugenics brought up again, and I just love that she incorporated these events into the book because we all could just learn so much from what our ancestors did in the past. And a lot of what happened in the 20s is very much forgotten by our society because most of us just view the 20s as like this party decade, you know, leading up to the stock market crash and the Depression. So I just love that Libba Bray definitely educates her readers with this series. But yeah, I can't recommend this book enough. I can't recommend this series enough. I cannot wait to get to Before the Devil Breaks You this coming month because I've heard that that installment is absolutely insane. And the very last book that I want to discuss is the Illuminate Files by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the first book in a trilogy of books, and this is essentially a really interesting YA science fiction series, but it's all told in like mixed media. So there's like transcriptions of like instant messaging conversations, as well as like surveillance footage and like diary entries and memos and things like that. So it definitely makes for a really fast-paced read. I definitely recommend going the route of listening to the audiobook and reading the physical book at the same time because I think that will be the best experience for you. I personally really loved that as well because it was just so immersive, and the audiobook is just so well done, and it's a full cast of characters. So this book centers around Katie and Ezra, and basically they're living on this really tiny like icy planet, I think, and basically this corporation called Baytech attacks their planet, and so they are all forced to evacuate. And so the whole book basically takes place on these 3 different spaceships. And there's just a lot going on in this book because basically the AI that controls one of the ships in particular basically goes crazy. And then there's a deadly virus that starts spreading on these spaceships. So there's just a lot going on, but I loved this book so much. I will say, however, that the first 80 or so pages were a struggle for me to get through personally, because I had to put a lot of effort into fully comprehending what was actually going on. But once the plot was fully established, I really started enjoying it. Really about page 100 is where things started picking up for me personally, and I was finding it really easy to understand what was going on. So I would definitely go into this book with a bit of patience because for me personally, that was a little bit of a struggle. But yeah, I cannot recommend this enough. This book was so unique and so crazy. My goodness, the plot twists throughout were actually insane. Like I literally had to put the book down at some points just to like react for a few seconds because there was just a lot happening. Needless to say, I am so looking forward to reading Gemina and Obsidio very soon. Man, this book was just so good, and if you have been sleeping on this like I did, please read this as soon as possible. Okay guys, that's going to be it for my end of November wrap up. I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I hope that you would consider subscribing. Also, don't forget to push that like button if you feel so inclined, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!